Hi, everybody. I'm Mike Messier. I'm here with one of the award-winning writers for Avalonia's 7th Theater Festival. He wrote Hillary Clinton in Hell. It was our choice for Best Comedic 10-minute play. And we only had 7 winners in our play submissions. And Jamie Cowperthwait, did I say that right?
Yes.
Okay. Jamie Cowperthwait is our winner. Jamie, where are you today, buddy?
I am in Brooklyn, New York.
And you were telling me that you were actually born in Greenwich, Connecticut. Is that true?
Yep, it's true.
And it's funny because I mentioned WWF or WWE, and you were telling me that you went to school with someone associated with that. Who was that?
Stephanie McMahon. Vince McMahon, at the time, she was just Vince McMahon's daughter. This was well before, this was in 7th grade, before she actually became a part of the show, which kind of blew my mind one day when I was in a laundromat, and in the background I saw her, and in the ring. But as I was saying, because I was very big into wrestling in the late 80s and early 90s, and then throughout the rest of my life, I've sort of gone away from it and come back in periodic ways and stuff. But it's always been something I've really loved. And so, yeah, she came. I think I was in 8th grade or 9th grade, and she came in 7th grade. So we really only overlapped for, I think, a year or two. And I was such a fan, and I kind of followed her and asked her questions, and because that was back when it was all the kayfabe, they never broke character. So I wanted to know what everybody was really like, and she didn't really want to tell me, but did tell me that Bobby Heenan was very nice, and he was the nicest wrestler. So that was great to know. There was a lot less information back then, in the 90s about your heroes, because you didn't have the internet. There were no YouTube video clips or anything. So to be able to ask her questions was like a dream come true for me.
I think that's a great story. It's too bad, she didn't. Who knows how things could have worked out, but for you, you've done pretty well for yourself because you have a family that's growing by the minute. And if tell us what you want to tell us about that situation.
Yeah. Well, my partner and I, we're not actually married yet, but we plan to. We just wanted to have kids first. We're a little bit on the older side for that stuff, so we didn't want to put it off any longer. But we have a 2.5-year, 2 and 3 months, who's in the other room with her, and then we have she is 38 weeks pregnant, so could go to the hospital any moment. I mean, the due date's actually not till July 24th, but we got this idea in our head that the baby was going to come early. So we're kind of, for various reasons, the second child often comes sooner, and we just thought, so in our mind, it could happen any day, but it really could be another week or two. So
what I thought, I guess just doing the math, isn't it normally 9 months and 4 weeks in a month, but some months have like 4.5 weeks. So how many weeks is the expected time usually?
That's one of those things that I think they used to say 9 months. Now they say 40 weeks, which is really 10 months, but they count it sort of sooner than you'd think. So like, it's a little confusing, but now basically she's at 38 out of 40 weeks. So kind of like 8.5 months by the old way they counted. If that makes any sense. I know we just have, it used to just be 9 months was always the number, and now it's 40 weeks. So,
well, if we go down a Mandela effect conversation too here, Jamie, we'll never get off this podcast because that sounds like another one of those, like, hey, I thought my heart was supposed to be in the left side of my chest, and now it's in the middle side of my chest. What parallel universe are we in?
Yes.
And speaking of which, Hillary Clinton in Hell was a standout and obviously won the best comedic. We had some really good comedic plays, by the way, and for any of the playwrights that submitted but weren't chosen as a winner, I'd like to just recognize that we had so many great submissions for this first year play festival. We really do appreciate all the submissions. And as a writer myself, it is a bit of a risk sometimes to kind of put a title or a piece that uses real life people. And as a reader, to be honest, I'm a little prejudiced against projects like that because things that are timed with current people, like for instance, if we had a Barack Obama versus the guy that he ran for president against, I'm drawing a blank. When he ran for president the first time, Obama, who was the Republican that he ran against? John Yeah, McCain. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, McCain. I was trying to blank on McCain.
Yeah.
For instance, if we had a John McCain versus Barack Obama play, that might have been highly valued 10 or 12 years ago. But with time, it loses some of that. However, with your piece, I found from reading it that it wasn't just making fun of Donald Trump or just making fun of Hillary Clinton. It was kind of making fun of them both, which I liked. I liked that a lot, at least from my read of it. It wasn't a piece that was, it was almost making fun of their relationship together, the hostility of their relationship, the way that the public engages or perceives these two very big pop culture icons, or not just pop culture, but world culture icons. I enjoyed it for that. And I said, I'm going to go it kind of won me over because, like I said, normally I'm biased against things that kind of have a timestamp on it. But in this particular piece, Hillary Clinton in Hell, I liked the piece so much that it did get the nod. You know what I mean? And Jamie, as a writer, do you often go into kind of current political events? Is that something that you do a lot as a writer, or is that something a bit unusual for you?
That's unusual for me. I like the way you articulated that because I kind of feel the same way. But this play came out of an exercise I was doing where I wrote a play a day for 30 days, just a draft, and I had an email list of friends, supportive friends that actually kind of grew as the month went on until I had about 40 people, and I would send the play out every night. And so it was really, the goal was to kind of crash myself in without thinking about kind of exactly what you said. Oh, I shouldn't write a play about this or because of that, because I can get so tied down in those things. So this was like, I just need to get something so I can go to bed, And so, it helped me push me into areas that I hadn't necessarily thought of. And I've since rewritten the play a bunch of times, like that was the first draft was just bang it out in 3 hours, send it out an email, go to bed. And then it was, oh, this one, there's something kind of interesting here. Let me work on that. And so, yeah, it is a little different for me for exactly that reason. But I have to say, I do really like writing sort of for specific occasions. It's not the most practical thing to do, but I'm also a songwriter, like comedy and musical theater songwriter. And I like when it's like, I had a friend, they had an underwater aquarium themed party. And so I wrote kind of a comic gangster rap about how hard it is being a goldfish, like in the tank. And, and actually that song translated to just kind of being funny outside of that party. But I really like being given some structure like that of like, here's a theme or, here's something to write about and do it fast and, see what happens. And so I often really enjoy stuff I write under those circumstances, although sometimes then you're left with something that's not the most usable thing in the world. But I do think in this case we're in this Trump period for, I don't know how much longer. I think, hopefully it's relevant for a little while. I mean, yeah, it's funny that you say, that it's sort of making fun of their relationship and making fun of both of them. And I agree, but I also think it also came from a kind of a personal place of like, it's called Hillary Clinton in Hell because Trump isn't, I don't know how much you want me to talk about the actual piece in case people see it someday.
It's totally up to you. I mean, I'd say that, we have to be aware that the international audience that can view this interview is much bigger than the live audience in Jacksonville, Florida.
Right.
So I'd say go ahead and not concern yourself too much with our smaller audience. Think about the bigger audience. Say whatever you like.
Yeah, no, it's interesting because there are some Trump supporters in my family, my immediate family, not my wife and kids, but my, parents and that kind of stuff. And so that's kind of a painful thing for me. I mean, I generally try to take, let's put it this way, Angels in America, the play about, the AIDS epidemic, to me is 100% about the AIDS epidemic, but it's also about human beings, and so it's not just a political play. It has political implications, but it is, so I try not to write a specifically political play, But that's not to say I avoid politics. I would like my plays, if they have political implications, then that's ideal. But I'm not here to write a play to say, vote for this person or don't vote for that person kind of thing. But to me, Trump isn't a political issue. To me, it's a moral issue, because I feel like he's so far beyond the pale of, and I don't know what your views are, so I'm not assuming we agree on any of this, but for me personally, I think he is so far beyond the pale of human decency that I wanted to write about that, because it's a painful situation for me, not only to have him in the White House, but to have a lot of people that I know that are my family, my in-laws, all sprinkled throughout this country. There are a lot of people who who think he's fantastic, and that is, to me, that's a painful thing to try to reconcile. And so this play was kind of that. It was trying to write about the two of them being intertwined in their fate, but also the fact is, the play is called Hillary Clinton in Hell. It's not called Hillary and Trump in Hell, even though they're in the same place. Because Hillary's in hell because I see Hillary as a flawed person. I'm not a huge Hillary booster necessarily. I don't tend to get too wrapped up in any politics I was glad Obama got elected, because I thought it was important for the country to have an African-American president. And I also vote Democrat, and I thought that was a good thing. But I wasn't one of these people that thought he was so fantastic personally. Like, I don't get an emotional attachment to presidents. They seem a little bit more, I don't know, symbolic or whatever. But to me,
figurehead almost, and at times figurehead.
And I know Noam Chomsky says that, the presidents there's a lot of symbolism in who the president is, but those small symbolic differences can lead to big differences in outcomes as far as foreign policy is concerned. So anyway, but to me, it's like, I see Hillary Clinton as like, and I think I see our whole thing, the whole Trump dynamic is that he points out how flawed the rest of us are in a way. And his appeal is that he says, I'm already corrupt. I'm already, a bad person, but at least I admit it. So really, there's something to me that is sort of devilish about him. Like, he really is that sort of cynic who says, like, well, because he can accuse his opponent of doing things that he has done 10 times worse, but doesn't stick to him. It sticks to the opponent because they're trying to be a good person and he's not, if that makes sense. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, so I think his whole rationale is that, hey, Hillary, what about her emails? When it's like he has this massive amount of conflicts of interest and all this stuff that he just walks right by, because he has this sort of superpower in that he has no shame. And I don't say that lightly. I really believe it about him. So anyway, so to me, it was sort of like the conundrum that you have when you have two people trying to fight it out, and for lack of a better word, when one of them is trying to also believe in some form of the rules, even though they're human and they probably cheat and they probably exaggerate, and she's a politician and she has a long list of flaws. And then you have someone who gleefully says there are no rules and rules are for suckers, basically. So that's what appealed to me, this idea that Trump is in the same place, but for him it's not hell, because for him he's one of these people who is, if you're fighting with him, he's happy, because at least it's attention. You know what I'm saying? And so I don't know, he reminds me of, like, I had some friends in high school, and I probably behaved this way myself at times, but I had friends in high school who were like so all about the drama that eventually people just said, we're not going to even talk. We can't talk to you anymore, because if we're talking to you, we're losing. But the problem is Trump's the president, so you can't detach. I mean, you can detach spiritually, but you can't just say, I'm not going to engage anymore, because he's the president of the country. So I have very strong feelings about Trump and Trumpism, but I also want any play that I write to be dramatic and balanced and honest. And the honest truth is, I don't think Hillary Clinton's a saint by any stretch of the imagination. I don't think anybody's a saint. But I do think Trump is unique in his degradation, if you will. That's just my opinion.
Well said. You hit a lot of great points there. And you know what it made me think of is, the comedic nature of those two's relationship. I mean, these are people that used to party together, and to
Yeah.
what extent, maybe we'll never know for sure. But I found it very interesting. The characters in this play environment were kind of stuck together for the eternal damnation. Um, I remembered I think it was the second debate of them in 2000, was it 15 or 16 when they were actually debating with each other? I guess it was 2016. And the same day of the debate was the release of the infamous videotape or audio tape of Trump, with the grabbing of women's private parts and all types of things that he was saying, his locker room talk speech or
Right.
video thing. And I think also there was an issue there for me, which is the fact that this tape was leaked. Uh, I wonder who held on until they decided to leak it. You know what I mean? Well, Trump probably assumed that Hillary's people or the Democrats were behind it, and he brought a bunch of women who had accused Bill Clinton of sexual harassment or all types of horrible things to the debate with him. So it kind of is this thing where you've got the gloves come off. And I compared that debate. I watched on YouTube a few days after that, the Ronald Reagan versus George Bush debate from like the 1980 Republican primary. It wasn't even a presidential debate. These guys were both running for the Republican nomination. And the amount of class, I guess, reserve. You could say that, that the Freemasons or Skull and Bones or some other societies were behind those type of guys, Bush and Reagan, these old school politicians. But the decorum they had, maybe it was a facade for other things behind the scenes, but at least Reagan and Bush put on a different type of show, so to speak, than the sideshow we got from Clinton and Hillary 30 years later. And to me, it's just depressing. I wish we had a third party that had some legs behind it. I do feel that me personally, I've become kind of disillusioned with the whole thing, which is a sad way to be. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Do you have any thoughts? Now that we're talking politics and you're a pretty educated guy and you're in New York City, do you have any thoughts on third party politics or the chances of a third party rising to prominence in our country, Jamie?
Yeah, I think I have always felt like the two-party system is like inherently impoverishing, I guess you could say, and the idea that somehow every issue has to fit into one of two baskets, it just feels like it's like trying to work out issues, with, I don't know, boxing gloves on or something, trying to write an essay with boxing gloves on or something. It just feels very, very limiting. I think right now there's this Trump exception where I'm all on board for Joe Biden. Like, I'm not even gonna, I'm gonna do everything I can, because I do think, to me, it's like I think Trump came along and found a country and a political system that was degraded and filled with problems that nobody was talking about, and there was a whole way of doing things that was, like you said, who leaked that Access Hollywood tape? Of course they did that. Of course they saved it. They said, this is our last ditch. We'll save this. In my opinion, I don't think it's a conspiracy theory to say that, the political operatives had that and got their hands on it somehow and said, let's do it right before the, that's the game as it used to be played. And then Trump kind of came along and you can't, it's very hard to argue against a lot of what Trump does when the alternative is so far from perfect. You know what I mean? It's like the immigration system. It's very easy I happen to think what Trump's version of the immigration system is a very important distinction. It is much worse than it used to be. It has now gone into the realm of, in my opinion, sort of overt malice. But I will never defend the way it was before he came along. It was already a huge mess, so it's like he's like an opportunistic infection or whatever, virus or something. That's a harsh language, but he's taking advantage of weaknesses that exist in our system. So if you try to defend the system, it's hard to do, but I still think it's worth defending. And I still think, the two-party system is better than what we have, is better than, it's something. It's better than nothing. I don't know about a third party. And I agree. There's always that debate where it's like people want to vote third party and other people say you're basically voting for, Trump or whoever. If you vote for a third party, you're just spoiling. And it does rub me the wrong way to think that people should have to feel wrong about voting for who they want to vote for. You know what I mean? Like this, it's a weird, gross feeling to say to people, hey, you have to vote for Joe Biden because, you have to. But I do think in this case, it's especially warranted. I don't have qualms about saying to people, not that you have to, but I would strongly encourage you to vote for Joe Biden. I have a friend who's very active in politics in the Bronx, and I think she's not going to vote for Biden, but she's doing that because she's sure that Biden will win. It's like she gets to kind of do a protest vote, and she just can't bring herself to do it for her own reasons. I don't actually have as many of those same problems with Joe Biden that she does, but let's say he doesn't excite me in the way that I would hope. But the thought of getting rid of Donald Trump does excite me. It's not even excitement. It's a relief. But so I don't know about third party. I wish I understood the politics better. I don't know how that works. Is there a way that, people talk about instant runoff voting where, you vote for your first top three candidates, and if there's a tie, and that seems like that could be a good thing, but there's always I don't know.
I think European countries do that, maybe France or some other. I was listening to a podcast about one of the European countries. It might have been France, but it might have been another European country that you vote in kind of like a two-step process. It was pretty intricate, but they're happy with it.
Yeah.
When I think about third-party politics, I remember Jesse Ventura, who won the Minnesota governorship.
Yeah.
I believe as a third party. He said that the two-party system gives you exactly one more choice than the Russians used to get.
Yeah.
So I always kind of, to me, an established third party with legs behind it, that's a viable contender for the presidential thing in my lifetime. If that were to happen 10 years from now, 20 years from now, I would be happy because I think that a legitimate third party, not some of these third parties that get 10% or whatever, but something that's legit. I think that is important. Whenever that takes place is a different matter.
Yeah.
And maybe this election it won't. I think the time has kind of come and gone. I don't think Kanye West is going to get a bunch of votes. But I think there needs to be a legitimate third party at some point. I'd like to see it.
I agree.
I'm curious about New York City because you have this gentleman, Cuomo. Now, he is the son of the original Mayor Cuomo. Am I correct?
Yes. Yes. Yeah. As far as I know, unless I'm wrong about that, I'm pretty positive. Yes.
Well, there's two sons. There's the one that had COVID, who kind of had like his own CNN kind of COVID show, and then there's his brother,
right,
who my sister became a big fan of his, watching him every night. But how is the feeling? Because at one point there was a little bit of a rumbling that people wanted to draft this New York's Cuomo to run for president this year. Was that something that was true, or was that just the impression I was getting from my area?
I think it was true. I heard it too, but I think it was just people talking. I don't think it was any serious thing. And I think he put it out pretty quickly by saying just no, just before it even got any momentum, I think. I think what I think is kind of interesting is that it really depends who you talk to, because, I think why Cuomo got so popular in that moment was why any politician in a crisis who is articulate and present becomes kind of lovable, like Giuliani, during 9/11. And then when you compare him to Trump, and, it's not even something that's necessarily a matter of debate. It's like even a lot of Trump supporters think he's a terrible person. When you compare Cuomo sitting there, able to answer questions articulately, and it's not the Trump circus that some people love, but no one really argues about whether it's a circus or not. You know what I mean? And so I just think, like, I think that's what people were responding to. I think it was like a celebrity moment, where it's just like, oh, someone to actually reassures us and actually is there and doing work and can talk about, this stuff intelligently and actually has some command of the details. We've gotten so used to this sort of circus, and this entertainment value with Donald Trump. And so I think that's what it was. I know that like progressives in New York, a lot of them don't like Cuomo. There's a big mix. And that's the thing. It really just depends, like almost like what channel you're tuned into in the culture. It's like, if you live on Twitter with my progressive Twitter feed, you think that, there's no way Joe Biden can win, the nomination. And then he suddenly goes down and sweeps the entire South, because it's just like, it's so fragmented now that it's like, it really just depends who you're listening to that it will shape your view of reality. Don't you think?
Yeah, I think so. And Jamie, this is a video going in some interesting ways, an interview, which I like. And one thing I used to talk about in my pro wrestling rants was that the pro wrestlers themselves and the wrestling fans have seemingly a universal daddy complex. And everybody looks at this promoter, Vince McMahon, who, you went to school with his daughter. They look at Vince McMahon as the daddy of wrestling. And now Stephanie's husband, Triple H, has become the new daddy of wrestling for these NXT wrestlers. And talking with you about Cuomo, Trump, and so forth, well, we still haven't had a female president. My belief is that this wrestling theory of mine applies to the United States presidency. The world, or our country, has a daddy complex. The complex is many people were not raised with a father who gave them the slap on the back or the attaboy. A lot of men are emotionally detached from their children, from their own lives. And so children grow up without a caring, nurturing father figure. Not that he has to be a pacifist or feminine, but a lot of people are seeking dad's approval more than they're seeking mom's love. I think mother's love is pretty common for most of us, but daddy's approval is not. So when we look for our president, it's a reflection of what the country is seeking as far as a father figure. If you look at Ronald Reagan with the Bob's Big Boy haircut, and maybe a little, kind of get his words mixed up sometimes, but he had this sheen to him. He was very optimistic. America is bright again. Then you had the original George Bush, who kind of had that elder statesman, old school politician. But then he kind of had run his course. He was there for 12 years, either as vice president or president. Then you got the baby boomer Bill Clinton, who kind of, with Fleetwood Mac and the theme song and Tipper Gore and Hillary Clinton, they all had this kind of, baby boomer, the big chill appeal. And then we get into, the country goes back and forth. But even the second George Bush, although he wasn't much, he provided some type of father figure, if nothing else, because he inherited those traits from his father. But here we are, where we've got this kind of uncle who you wouldn't trust with the remote control during the Super Bowl to get to come back to the gameplay after the commercials on the other channel. But to me, our country is always looking for that father figure, and a guy like Cuomo, the strong presence, the quick wit, the intelligence, the strength that he seemed to possess, the camera friendliness, we're going to get through this together, New York, but we have to be vigilant. That appealed to people, and it's just an interesting thing.
Yeah, that is really interesting. I like that theory. I was going to say, what it reminded me of too, though, with pro wrestling and politics, is I feel like that model of pro wrestling, like punditry, where you have the good commentator and then the heel commentator, to me, it sort of set the tone for everything today with cable news and everything. This idea that there's going to be an action that takes place in the ring, and then your, good baby face commentator or whatever is going to tell you what that means from the perspective of the hero, and then the heel is going to tell you what it means from the perspective. And it's the same. They're talking about the same thing, but one guy's saying, oh, that's a despicable move, and then the heel commentator saying, that's just good, smart, technical wrestling, and it's like, that's what we have now. You flip from Fox to CNN or whatever, and they're just talking about the same thing, but they're just spinning it. And it's, it's interesting. Like what you say about this father figure thing. It's really, I don't know. It is kind of unfortunate that so much of this stuff seems to sway based on those factors. And that, I have to say, I also think, like, we have this culture war kind of thing. When Obama was president for 8 years, I paid almost no attention to politics. And I almost feel like we have this, but when Bush was president, W. Bush, I paid a lot of attention. And when Trump is president, I pay a lot of attention. And I think that we have this thing that, in a way, when you have a cultural figure in the White House who sort of represents your side of the culture war, you can relax and tune out from politics, and you can feel comfortable that we don't really understand how the whole system works or what's going to happen. But Obama gets, he's more like me. If there's a pyramid of value, we're closer to the top and the center. And, so where Trump comes along, and people go, his supporters go like, oh, he's kind of more like me. He says what I'm thinking. I can just have, I don't have to worry about what's happening because I know Trump's there. Whereas I'm lying awake at night, there's just this weird, I realized from when talking to my father once that after 6 years of Obama, like he was as afraid of Obama as I was of George W. Bush. And it was like, what? You know what I mean? Like my father is a very partisan person, in my opinion. He thinks I'm a very partisan person. I don't think I'm as partisan as he thinks I am. Although my views right now are fairly partisan because I think it's warranted. But he thinks, I forget how it came up, but he thinks Obama is the I think in the beginning of the Trump presidency it kind of came up, and we asked him who do you think has a worse character and integrity than Trump, and he said Obama. And it was just like, what? And I don't know, I don't think that's true personally, but I also didn't pay a lot of attention during Obama because I figured he's kind of going to have my interests at heart, not me personally, but he represents my part of the cultural divide.
So you can coast for a while. I get it. And that's a great point. And, I just to another nail in this coffin of politics that I normally don't get a chance to talk about, Jamie, so I appreciate this. But I watched a movie on Netflix this morning, which was Rocking the House. Have you seen it?
No.
Well, it's about AOC and 3 other candidates in the 2018 campaign. And I did not know much about AOC. Alicia, I say her name wrong, but Cortez. So she's got a pretty interesting story. And but it's not just about her. It's about other candidates that did not win. There was 3 other people that they highlighted. And basically what this documentary was about was this 2018 era of getting people that had never run for political office before to give it a chance. And AOC was one of the few that succeeded. And she actually succeeded by beating out an incumbent Democratic, position holder. And she ran as a Democrat as well, which is very unusual because the guy had his position for 14 years and she beat him head to head. So that was very interesting. And, I found her story interesting. The other people's stories interesting. What I guess maybe a little cynical, of the 4 people highlighted, she by far was the most dynamic as far as she's got a great look. She's like, she's a woman that you'd want to date or have her be your girlfriend or whatever. Most people couldn't argue on a cosmetic level. She's dynamic looking. She's attractive. And she's got kind of a personality that pops. And some of these other folks, they were more like down-to-earth people you might see in your local drugstore buying, dog food or something. So it was both uplifting and depressing that of the people they highlighted in this film, AOC really was the one that succeeded. She's got a very popping personality, but B, on a cosmetic level, she's very physically attractive as well.
Yeah. That's interesting. I'll have to look for that documentary. But I agree. I mean, I'm sure in the age of TV, that doesn't, but it is, I think with her, it is that combination because she is really smart and she is really fearless too. She's not, and she uses like Instagram really well. I feel like so much of this too is technology. Like Trump uses Twitter the best of anyone. I mean, I happen to find his aim and his actual content of what he says to be pretty repugnant to me, but he's a genius at it somehow. He has this sort of intuitive shamelessness, I guess. But, you know, there's a lot to be said for that when someone comes along with a new voice. And I remember when AOC was, I think she had just been elected, you know, but she was doing Instagram videos of herself cooking, you know, her dinner in her new apartment or where she was living or somewhere, you know. Here I am walking into the house and all that stuff. And I just think that stuff is so powerful, you know, like when because it brings the whole process forward in a way that, I don't know, it's like a new style of music or something, like, you know, when electric guitar gets invented and then it just changes how music is made. And it's kind of like that. It's like social media is now just changing politics. But I agree. I feel like we look at a lot of this politics the same way, in that we're very interested in the cultural aspects of it. You know, it seems like you remark on those aspects, and I do too. Like I remember it as a cultural, social, entertainment, for lack of a better word, phenomenon. Those are the things that stick with me. The look, the phrases, how it affected the way people felt, not necessarily the policy. I mean, that's one good thing about being a writer, is we're not writing studies about presidential politics. We're writing about people, you know.
Tell me about the guitars in the background, because you also write songs, and I see you have at least 2 guitar cases and a guitar on a stand right there. Do you play in bands when we do have events, or what's going on?
So this is my little studio. What you can't see is the keyboard right here. I'm primarily a pianist, although I also play the guitar. I started in this field as an assistant composer at a commercial music house, a jingle house. And so that was kind of my, like, okay, someday I'm gonna have my own, you know, I'm gonna be doing freelance commercial music. But what I actually ended up doing a lot of there, in addition to writing some music, was writing a lot of lyrics and a lot of melodies, working with my boss, who was a composer. And so then I kind of got into the musical theater world and like comedy songs. And so some of these guitars, I have to admit, are things that I bought over the years of, like, I need to have these sort of tools for my home studio. And I don't record guitar very much. I play the guitar with my son a lot now, more, and ukulele and guitar and stuff, but I really am primarily a pianist. And but you know, they're the types of the guitars that you would have. You probably can't see this. This is like a bass, and like a Mexican Fender bass, and I've got a ukulele. This is a Takai Strat, which my boss actually gave me, which is a Japanese Strat from the early 80s, when they made them so much like Fenders that people want, you know, it's a good way to get like a relatively cheap Fender. That's good. And then I was in a bluegrass band in high school. In college. So that's a Martin guitar that I've had for, I guess, like 30 years now. That one in the middle is a hollow body. These are all sort of, except for the Martin, which is a pretty expensive guitar. These are all the kind of like quality, but not like crazy expensive guitars. You know, like you're talking like $400 for a guitar instead of $1,000,
Right.
Except for that Martin, which is expensive. But so, and then that's a hollow body, which I ordered from a company called Eastwood, which that is a guitar I'm probably going to get rid of because I almost never use it. And it's a beautiful looking guitar, but I don't play it. So that's, you know, and then I have a baritone guitar, which is also something you would want to have if you're writing commercial music every day, which I am not anymore. Now I'm more writing plays, and I'm sort of, and doing musical theater. And I am also, work-wise, I'm sort of at a crossroads. I'm not sure what I'm going to do. I've learned over the last 15 years of writing some commercial music, some film music, some musical theater music, that I don't, that I'm really more comfortable with words, and I'm more comfortable with characters. You know, musical theater, you kind of do both, but I often work with composers when I write musical theater. So I'll be the lyricist, book writer, and I like that it has a musical component to it, but I am not necessarily the guy who is going to focus on music all the time. I'm more interested in like characters, and so that's where I've been writing these plays a lot more. But I still do work at an after-school program where we write full-length musicals with cast of New York City teenagers. I just had rehearsal. That was what I was doing before this. So I wrote 8 of those full-length shows. So that was all music production because it's not live. I would write all the tracks, and then they would learn to sing the songs over the tracks, and then we would play them in the theater recorded. So that I used all that stuff to make all those albums or those shows over the last 8 years. And then so yeah, so I've done a lot of music production in this room and in the other, and then I've lived in a few different apartments in this neighborhood. So yeah, these are the kind of basic tools of music production, plus a few that I sort of impulsively bought and probably should sell now because I don't actually use them.
Did I see on a bio on you online, Jamie, that you were like the theater director in residence or the theater writer in residence in New York somewhere? Can you tell? Is that true? Did I see that?
Yeah, well, it wasn't really a writer in residence. It was more of the musical theater resident at Playwrights Horizons, which is really like a script reading and an assistant type job. So, and it's basically you read. They have an unsolicited manuscript policy there. So anybody can submit. You don't have to come through an agent or anything. And so you are the first reader as the assistant, and you write a review and you catalog it and you put it in the database, and then you pass it on, to the music theater, to Kent Nicholson, who is the music theater guy there. And then when they do unfortunately, the year that I was there, they did not actually have a musical, but one, they just didn't in their season. They occasionally don't have musicals. I worked a little bit on Far From Heaven, which was a musical by Scott Frankel and Michael Corey based on the movie. So I did overlap with them a little bit, and that was nice. But one of the perks of that job is that you get to really work on a high level musical as an assistant and, hang out with the writers and do stuff for them and make copies and all that stuff. But you get to be in the room and be in the rehearsal room and stuff. And I got to see a lot of free plays, which was nice. And I got to meet everyone at Playwrights Horizons, and I got to meet a lot of writers and read a lot of scripts. And it's funny when you were talking about how you're sort of biased against certain types of scripts, after reading scripts for a year, I also, I was more biased a little bit against, cultural figures as characters in a play like that. To me, sometimes that was a warning sign that what I was about to see was more like a skit, or it just bespoke certain. Oftentimes I didn't like those plays, didn't turn out to be super well written. But I just, like I said, I was doing this exercise with this play, and I really like this play. I like just in terms of what I got to express in there, and I'm starting to learn more and more with writing. I'm actually working on a novel right now. But I'm finding more and more that what I love about it, if you think about what we said about pro wrestling, how every event is interpreted by the good guy and the bad guy, and then politics, everything is debatable. If you talk to my friends around here, the COVID is spiking because Trump didn't do it right. The states that reopened too soon, people weren't wearing masks. They didn't take it seriously. Now it's reopening. If you talk to, as we were talking to my wife's family, in Indiana, it's spiking because of the Black Lives Matter protests. Tens of thousands of people in the streets, standing shoulder to shoulder. I happen to know that, or it seems to me from what I've read and from what I saw when I was in one of those protests, that everybody was wearing masks and it was outdoors. And so in my opinion, that's not the cause, but I don't know, so it's like when everything is up for argument. And I think that's one thing about the Trump era that is more true than ever. I mean, it's been getting more true, but now there's nothing that is not sort of open to partisan interpretation. With certain areas used to be sort of, we can all at least agree on these things. And now, it's like everything is, whether Roger Stone should be in prison or not is a matter of, there's two completely different stories. One is that, they were investigating Russian corruption and that he lied to the FBI, and he's, nobody's above the law. He goes to jail, and the other is these rogue prosecutors were completely out of line. They got him on a process violation, and it's completely unfair, and he's being persecuted. It's like, so what I love about writing and about writing plays is that you can express stuff that can't be, it seems to be the only way to try to express some sort of complicated truth, for me, without having to boil it down to a political message or a political argument.
We should have you on our do this podcast, Wrestling with the Future podcast, and we should have you on, Jamie, to discuss some of these issues as they relate to wrestling and beyond wrestling, because one thing that wrestling fans are kind of in on the joke is that wrestling's real, life is a work. You know what I mean? And the term work, for those that aren't familiar, basically means a predetermined series of events. And some would have us believe that a lot of things we see on television, all the way up to the George Floyd murder and debates, I'm not debates, protests and ensuing riots. I watch a guy on YouTube, Dane Calloway, who was breaking down the video cameras from the police footage and the store footage and pointing out some real interesting inconsistencies with the George Floyd footage. For instance, George Floyd had 2 passengers in his car when he was pulled over. Well, nobody talked about that. Nobody said that what happened to these 2 people that were in his car. The 2 people that were in George's car were a young woman and another guy. And from the video that I originally watched of the whole murder taking place, it seemed like the young woman who was videotaping with her camera might have been the person in the car with George at the time he was pulled over. And there was another guy yelling at the police, and that might have been the person who was in his car as well. But no news report, not CNN, not Fox, ever tried to contact the 2 people that were in George Floyd's car. Why not? There was video of the police footage that was released by the Minnesota police of one police officer who was arresting George Floyd handing a handwritten note to a 5th officer who left the scene. What was in this handwritten note? Nobody's talking about it, but this guy, Dane Calloway, who has his own YouTube channel, Patreon channel, he's an African-American guy. I would guess he's about 35 or 40. This guy, Dane Calloway, is one of the most intense, hardcore investigative journalists in the world, as far as I'm concerned. And he's just doing stuff on YouTube. He's not on CNN. He's not on Fox News. He's not on NBC, ABC. He's a guy who said he's going to uncover the truth. A lot of the stuff that he talks about is slavery. He talks about that the whole slave trade and African Americans, a lot of them, according to him, might have been in this country, the United States. They weren't necessarily brought in from Africa. That some of the things that we're learning in our history books are straight out lies. The lies to push forward a narrative. And what I like about YouTube is that different thoughts are able to breathe and live and gain a following. And we are no longer growing up in an era where you have NBC, CBS, or ABC, 3 networks, and that's going to tell you what to think. I think I could be wrong. I'm not an expert, but the BBC used to control the UK television, if I'm correct, or they still do. So they didn't have many choices of what to watch. But with outlets like YouTube, Vimeo, the internet, people are more empowered to share alternative information sources, which I like.
I mean, that's an interesting. Yeah, I think it cuts both ways. Unfortunately, though, I think I just remember I had an internship at Rolling Stone briefly for a few months right after I got out of school, and these tapes would come in of bands submitting them to Rolling Stone, and once the critics would look through them, the interns were allowed to just take whichever demo tape they wanted. And it seemed at first it was like, wow, this is unbelievable, free music, and then you listen to 10 of 20 of them and you're like, well, you didn't really want the music, and so I think it's a really interesting question of how I think people kind of hate on gatekeepers, and I get it, but I also think we as a society, we need to have we want some type of organization of our information. We want some type of stamp, there needs to be some kind of process of whose information and whose voice, let's put it this way, there needs to be, there will be some type of process by which whose voice gets heard, gets propagated, because we can't listen to 150 million voices at the same time. So it's and the question is, what is that process? How are those YouTube algorithms and Twitter and Facebook, what is developing right now. You know what I'm saying? It's like, and I do think there's a process by which a new technology comes along and opens up a space for all these new voices to come in. And then as the kind of power structure kind of starts to assimilate and incorporate it, it brings it back in. And then something new comes along, hopefully, and breaks it open again. Like cable TV at the beginning, all of a sudden there was all these channels and you had, cable access and things kind of came out of that. But eventually, it was kind of like they got a grip on it again. And I don't know that it's necessarily a good or bad thing, because as we're seeing, hate speech, or, however you define it, but, conspiracy theories and stuff are being sent around the world on social media, and governments are using social media to deceive people. This idea that the internet was going to make everything free and open and it would be this great marketplace of ideas, it's kind of fine, but it's like saying, putting, a million people in a stadium and saying, like, no rules, whoever gets out alive wins. That's not the same as a football game. You know what I mean? It's like one of them is a bloody mess and one of them is like a dangerous, but at least there's some rules, and so I just find it interesting, because I think technology companies sold this promise of, unbiased, we'll take the middleman out, when really, in my opinion, that's oftentimes code word for, we're going to make it really cheap so we don't actually have to pay anyone to be an editor and to, vet these ideas. It's just sharing, like when you take an Uber, you're just sharing your car with someone. It's a lot of BS, in my opinion, because Uber is still a car company now, like they make you, your car has to look a certain way, and, you have to follow all these rules and stuff. So you're basically an Uber driver, but they don't want to look at it that way. Just in the same way that YouTube doesn't want to take responsibility for what's on YouTube, and Facebook doesn't want to take responsibility for what's on Facebook. And I don't know. I think they start taking some responsibility, and then we're right back where we were with newspapers.
Quality control. Yeah, I just listened to a 6-week or a 6-episode podcast, Uber versus Lyft. It was on Apple Podcasts, and I didn't realize, because the first time I used Lyft was about 7 months ago. I was in Texas for a movie, and I said, gee, I can sit on set even though my scenes have been filmed, or I can try to figure out how to put Lyft into my phone. And I did, and I was able to get to the hotel and reclaim about 7 or 8 hours of my life. But I didn't realize how big Lyft and Uber were in cities like New York City, San Francisco, where apparently I think Uber and Lyft had their first territorial battle, almost like the old wrestling days, a territory war between the huge Uber company and Lyft, which was small by comparison, but and Uber even offered to buy Lyft out at one point in their competition. We could talk about world events all day and all night, man. I'm sure we could definitely explore a lot of issues, but I want to go back to you, because I want this opportunity for you to promote yourself. Your writing, you mentioned a novel. Is that something you feel comfortable talking about now, or do you want to keep that under wraps until you finish it?
I can talk about it a little bit. It is basically, it's autobiographical fiction. It's not a memoir. I don't want to have to, I want to be able to tell a story, and I want the burden of having to tell an interesting story without just saying, oh, this is just true, this is what happened, because it's not all true. It's not, most of it's not true, but it is based on my life in the early 2000s, where I was basically coming from a very sort of Connecticut, waspy, wealthy family, working for my father on Wall Street, and in the process of coming out of the closet, questioning my sexuality, which it was a long road that has now sort of ended with me married to a woman and having kids with a woman. But it was a big part of my life. It was like the beginning of my kind of just freeing myself from this conformity that I had been too afraid to kind of break out of. And so as a result, I mean, I think maybe as a writer, you always have that kind of maniacal thing that, that I'm interesting as a person to write about or something. But I just think I've been in a lot of different parts of New York City and across a lot of different sort of scenes and spectrum, across the spectrum. And so I think my story is interesting, and I've told it in other ways and other formats, like in storytelling and solo show, and I've gotten a good reaction. So, and plus, like I said, I write at this point. I write just because I want to get it out. I don't want to, it's as much just for me, whether anyone ever reads it or not. It's like, I want to say these things so that they're not inside and I don't feel like I have to burden the people around me listening to me talk. I mean, this podcast is great because I can just talk. As you know, it seems like we both like to talk about stuff. So, but writing is another way of expressing yourself. So that's it's right now. I'm writing 1,000 words a day. I'm up to about 540 pages. It's just a total bleh, get it out there type of draft. When I get to 800 pages, I'm gonna reread it and start shaping it into something.
There's that term that they use in screenwriting books, the vomit draft.
Yes.
Which it's kind of like, and it's a little bit of a visual image that's a little unpleasant, but basically the idea, and a lot of screenwriting books are trying to teach new writers, young writers, whoever, that don't have inhibitions, don't be afraid, don't self-censor, don't try to get your spell check all in place, and don't. Here's another thing, Jamie, as far as writing goes. Sometimes I think it's best to get a first draft out without going to friends, family, or whoever looking for feedback on every single chapter or in a screen. I've mostly written screenplays myself. I'm trying to get more into novellas at this point. Distance from Avalon is the first novella I've written, 17,000 words, which basically that story I've written as a screenplay, stage play, and a novella, which is where Avalonia Festival comes from. Cool. So that's the tie-in there. But the vomit draft is what I think you're thinking of. And what are some of the other plays you've written, Jamie?
Well, I've written a lot of short musicals. One was called Germs, and it was for college kids to perform, and it was it's like just a silly thing about it. It's like a guy, their resort is on the human palm, and it's called the Royal Palm, and it's a dad who just has these old-fashioned business values, and if you run a good family resort, you'll always do well. But like the new sanitizing, like humans are now using Purell and air dryers and washing their hands more, and it's killing all the guests. So they have to figure out where to go. So they end up going down and living in the nether regions because that will always be a haven for germs. So that was one really silly thing we wrote. We had something published, a short musical. My collaborator Solomon and I had another one for teenagers. This one was written for teenagers. It was published in this volume of plays by Samuel French for teenagers. Like if you're a drama teacher of high school kids, that was sort of a pirate time travel thing that was very loosely based on Captain's Courageous by Rudyard Kipling. So then I've written these, the shorter plays are something I've been doing lately because I realized that I was getting bogged down trying to write these longer full-length plays. I've written one full-length play that actually started as a musical that was sort of autobiographical based on me and my collaborator. We made up this story, but it was this idea of, they're in this very white college in Vermont, which is kind of like where I went to college, and they're roommates, and one of them sort of middle-class African-American from the South, and that was kind of based on my collaborator, and then one of them is more based on me, and it's kind of like the character based on me is having everything kind of handed to him but doesn't want it, and the character who's African-American like wants to work on Wall Street and wants to fit in, but because he's in this very white place and people don't, he doesn't understand the sort of cultural secret rules of these kind of waspy places, he's in this situation where he can't always get where he wants to go. And then there's like a love triangle story in there too. But so there's that. And then other short plays I've written, I wrote one called Billy Kong, which is about these two guys who are guarding like a giant gorilla that was captured in the Amazon somewhere. That's actually sort of allegorical Trump again, because it's like one of them thinks they should let Billy Kong out because he's convinced that he can tell, when someone has a good soul, and that even though he's this giant gorilla, he'll clean up America by going and, he's not going to hurt anyone who doesn't deserve it, basically. And the other guy's like, that's crazy. We can't let him out. And he's like, no. And he tells a story about how Billy, was nice to everyone except this one thief who was in the camp, and he killed the thief. And so he knows that Billy can tell. And it's sort of, Billy Kong is this kind of gorilla giant gorilla is kind of like the Trump phenomenon, this faith that people have that Trump's only going to hurt the people that deserve to be hurt, you know, and he somehow has this ability to tell, you know, who deserves to be
But
taken.
he's more like the bull in the china shop type of thing that's just going to knock stuff over.
Yeah.
You know,
I think he's worse than a bull in a china shop. I think he's actually a hurtful person. I mean, I think his behavior toward immigrants and immigrant children and families and his attitudes about race, I don't know if you've ever read about or seen the documentary about the Central Park Four, the kids who were accused of, when they were teenagers, they were put in jail for the Central Park jogging rape case, you know, and
I haven't seen it, but I will watch it. I will watch it.
And there was, you know, basically these 4 teenage kids were out in the park, you know, at night, on a night in the 80s in Central Park when all these kids were in the park, and they kind of got swept up after when this jogger was found, this woman, the Central Park jogger, who was beaten senseless and raped. I mean, horrible crime, you know, and they were rounded up and they were kept in the police department overnight, and they basically all confessed, but they, you know, a lot of them didn't even know they were confessing. They just thought, I get to go home if I tell them what they want to hear and stuff. And they went to prison for, you know, 10 or so years each until their sentences were actually voided, which means, or vacated, which means like it's more than a pardon. It's like, never should have happened. You never should have been in prison. There was no way to, you know, and they found the guy who did it. And, you know, the whole time Trump was took out an ad in the New York Times calling them, you know, asking to bring back the death penalty and these kids. And he was just doing his Trump thing of like, you know, these monsters are in the streets, you know, let's get them. And when they were exonerated only a few years ago, he tweeted, you know, oh, well, what were they doing in the park that night? Believe me, these weren't good kids, you know? And it's like, you just got to watch the documentary because they interview these kids and you're just like, come on, you know, it's like it's beyond bad. In my opinion, Trump is as bad as it gets, you know? I mean, he really,
the full page ad in the newspaper. I remember that part of the story.
Yeah.
The full page ad. Yeah.
Yeah, I just think it's hard to say that because it's so easy to say, oh, he's the devil or whatever. And I don't say that type of stuff lightly, but you know, I know not everyone feels this way, but I do think he has the potential there's really no bottom to where this country could be headed with him. And that's just how I feel.
Well, I will tell an anecdote without judgment, but I will tell the one Donald Trump anecdote that not too many people know that I do, if you want to hear it.
Yeah.
Okay. So a friend of mine, I would call this person a friend, was on the Celebrity Apprentice.
Uh-huh.
And she was one of the female celebrity apprentices. Okay. And they had they did all these competitions and all these games. One of the competitions led both teams, the male team and the woman team, to like some type of shop, like an antique shop or a woman's clothier shop, I think is what it was. And the women side, and these were all celebrities too, you know, B celebrities, whatever was on the show. They were given a dressing room within this women's clothier shop, and their dressing room was small but delicate and kind of girly, and it even had a commode, a toilet in the women's dressing room, which was really just made for 1 or 2 people. It wasn't made for 6 or 8 people, but here they were. And around the toilet was like one of those Asian or Oriental, doors. You know, I'm talking about like those doors that are like you see them in a restaurant with a little barrier thing. Well, Trump comes in to visit the women celebrities and to basically just kind of say hello or whatever, or to throw his ego around. And he's like, where's your bathroom? And the women, you know, kind of reluctantly point out that they have this little, you know, toilet in their dressing room, but all it's surrounded by is this little Oriental door thing, which is really no privacy at all. Well, according to my female celebrity apprentice friend, Trump proceeded to go into the little commode. And once again, this is a small room, and this is like a division within their small room. And apparently he sat down, he made himself comfortable, he made a big stink, quite literally, and used their bathroom to do his business in a big time way, so to speak, without any regard or concern that his noises, his aromas, were coming out with little closure or with no barrier. I mean, he didn't care. The point is, most guys, most reasonable people would not use a bathroom that was assigned to women, where the only privacy you would have is just this little oriental door.
Yeah.
But he almost reveled in it. Like he wanted them to know that he was there, and then he wanted them to know that his stink would be stinking up the joint for after he left. He wanted to make an impression, and these were women that were on his TV show and that were celebrities. These weren't even regular civilians. These were people that were getting paid to be on his TV show for ratings and everything else. But that was the story I heard. I wasn't there, but the friend of mine who told me this, and she said that she was one of Trump's favorites. Like, Trump actually liked her. So it wasn't a move where he was discretionary against which candidates on the show he liked and which ones he didn't. It was that he just did this either with no thought or with the thought of, I'm going to show who the man is today.
Right. Wow. Yeah, I mean, it doesn't surprise me. The no thought thing, it doesn't surprise me. I mean, I think he's one of those people who, that's an amazing story. I think it's one of these people who just does not care about other people at all. You know, he's so wrapped in his ego, his own, whatever it is, the battles he's fighting inside himself or something, that I think he just shut that part of himself off as a survival tactic at some point. And he just, moves throughout the world, not like really making a point of not caring, because otherwise I think he would fall apart if he had to start to try to figure out who liked him and who didn't like him. I don't know. Does that make sense? I think oftentimes people like that, and I know in my own life when I've been like that, like, because I feel like in my 20s, I went through a period where I just kind of shut down and was like, I don't care. I'm too weak. I don't want to be weak anymore. I want to put on this, and I'm going to date women and I'm not going to even care if they're crying. Like, I kind of had that little sociopath phase where I just thought it protected me. It felt powerful to say, I don't care if I hurt this girl's feelings. I'm sick of being so sensitive or something, and like, I didn't know how to find that middle ground. But I think I think oftentimes with people like that, like, they're not even aware of how easy they are to read. You know what I mean? Like, they think they're not even thinking about it, but it's like, it's so obvious who, he gets excited when an attractive woman walks in, he gets, grossed. It's just, he can't hide it because, you know what I'm saying? Like, he's one of those people who, like, I don't know that he does any of this intentionally. I think some of it is intentional, but I think which I think is one of the reasons why it's hard to pin him down, because, he just doesn't, he believes his own myths.
One thing I would have to give the guy credit for, as much as he might be miscast in his role as president, he does have a sense of humor in there somewhere. I mean, some of the things he does, there is humor, if nothing else. And talk about pro wrestling and you going to school with Stephanie McMahon. Well, the WWE is the #1 funder of Donald Trump's 2016 campaign. And I've had a video on the Mike Messier YouTube channel where I said, if you support WWE or NXT, you also support Donald Trump. Yeah. And I put that video out in 2017, and I got about 4 likes and about 80 dislikes because the wrestling fans did not want to confront the issue that your $10 a month for the WWE network goes to the WWE, which goes to Vince McMahon, which goes to Donald Trump. I put that correlation together in my own mind. The wrestling fans, most of them, did not want to confront that because many of them were outspoken against Trump. Right. But my point to them is, if you're supporting the World Wrestling Entertainment, you are, whether you like it or you don't like it, some of that money is going to this presidency. And wrestling fans had a hard time accepting that because wrestling is their escape from the real world. My point was, it might be an escape for you, but your money is supporting this reality. Yeah. And on top of that, when the WWE started doing shows in Saudi Arabia, which has a lot of things that homosexuals are thrown off roofs as a penalty for being homosexuals in public, and women are just now getting the right to drive a car. your WWE that you loved as a kid, I loved as a kid. I'm wearing a Macho Man Randy Savage T-shirt right now. All of those things, maybe our money is being spent on a company that we don't agree with their political associations.
Yeah, yeah, that's really interesting, and it's a tough question because I feel like, it's hard because I feel like that's so true of so many things with this money, that we're part of this money system, and the money just goes, it's such a hard one. It's like where do you spend your money? But yeah, I do feel, I have to say, this Trump thing has bummed me out in that it's made it harder for me to love the WWE, because it's almost as if the WWE sort of circus that I've loved for so long became, jumped off the stage and became real, and it's not funny anymore. You know what I mean? Like, it's like we went too far down with the joke, and now, I mean, I don't think a lot of people realize, that Donald Trump is in the WWE Hall of Fame. You know what I mean? Like, it's not an accident. Like, he's a heel. He's like an incredibly talented heel. I mean, you're right. He's very funny. I mean, his humor is often mean, but he's basically, when you watch his rallies, I mean, and that's another thing it's that same vibe of like when we loved pro wrestling as a kid, and people used to say to me, how can you like that crap, in the 80s, like, that's all fake, and it was like, I never wanted to say I know it's fake because I didn't want to give them the satisfaction. I wanted to just feel superior, that they were too dumb to know that it was fake and we didn't have to say it was fake or something. You know what I mean? Like that, like we were in on the joke, and I think like that's a lot of what Trump supporters feel, that thrill of like when Trump says something and the media picks it up and goes, look how stupid he is. He thinks that if you stop testing for COVID, the numbers will go down, how could anyone be that dumb? And they know what, that what he really means is, and he often speaks in these sort of, he goes out of his way to leave little ambiguities that can scare people and confuse people, but so that only the people who are on the team, who trust him, know what he's saying. So that they, what I'm saying? So it's like, he'll say things and he doesn't honor that idea that, well, you're the president. So you need to make sure, just like you're a writer, when you write a screenplay, a lot of what you do, the way I see it, is you are closing the doors in the audience's mind so that they stay on the ride with you. It's like when a character walks in, you don't have them put a fire helmet on the table if that's not part of their character. They might be a firefighter, but it does not, if it's not relevant, you don't include it. Whereas I feel like Trump, leaves all these things hanging around, and it sends everybody off on this freak out, and his fans know what he really means, and they know that when he says don't test for COVID, that that's a little bit that he's doing, and of course, and that word, then they see us as too dumb too unsophisticated to understand that we need to be spoon-fed or something. You know what I mean? I just think like he does that. I think he always does that.
It reminds me of the Q thing 2 or 3 years ago. Do you remember that Q deal that was going on?
I heard a lot about it.
I had a friend, a guy who I did some other wrestling podcasts with, and he was big time into the Q, and he was trying to explain it to me, and he sent me a file, and I looked at it, and I said, hey, maybe there's something to this thing, but the basic thought from these Q followers on Reddit was that Trump himself was Q, and that the Trump was releasing on Reddit through this different name of Q insider information directly from the presidency to his fan base. And hey, I don't know. I mean, who's to say? I mean, I know you're a musician, and I don't know if you're familiar. Well, I'm guessing you would be with the Paul McCartney replacement theory, conspiracy theory, and that's something that we've been exploring on my wrestling podcast. We had Mike Williams, who's an expert on the Paul is dead theory, conspiracy, and I'm listening to this wonderful book. You would probably like it too. The Memoirs of Billy Shears, which is written in a fictional way from the perspective of Paul McCartney admitting to being the second Paul McCartney. If the book is fiction, if it's pure fiction, it's a masterpiece because it's so many detail about the Magical Mystery Tour, Sgt. Pepper's. I was never a Beatles fan growing up because my sister was a Beatles fan, so I liked other bands like AC/DC or Led Zeppelin. But this book is making me want to buy every Beatles album there is to see if these clues are actually true. And he's talking about numerology and blah, blah, blah. Well, man, I know that you're in New York City. You've got a big weekend here because there's going to be a new addition to your family at any minute now. And I'm sure that your girlfriend is very excited about that. And we wish you the best with that ensuing delivery, so to speak, because it could happen at any minute now, correct?
Yes. Yeah. Thank you. And it's been so good to talk about all these things. I really appreciate, you having the festival. I'm sorry that it's COVID is derailing it, but this conversation was very enjoyable, and to get a chance to talk about, my writing is always like a, fun thing to do. So thanks, Mike. I appreciate it.
Well, Jamie, thanks for the talk. I'm going to put this on the Mike Messier YouTube channel. I'll probably also put it on the Wrestling with the Future YouTube channel if you don't mind, because we might get a few more hits out of there. And because we've mentioned pro wrestling and your story with Stephanie McMahon, that would be a good tie-in. And we look forward to hearing more from you. Some of the playwrights had websites like New Play Exchange and stuff like that. Are you on any of those?
I'm not. I think I'm gonna be on New Play Exchange soon. I have my website that's more geared toward my music stuff, but I'm working on the plays, getting the plays some up there in some way, and then I was just talking to a friend about New Play Exchange. Do you belong to New Play Exchange?
Yeah, just about 5 or 6 months ago, I joined New Play Exchange. Before that, I've been a big proponent of Play Submissions Helper, which has the promo code Mike, my name, named after me. If anyone's listening or watching us, they can go to playsubmissionshelper.com and use the promo code Mike and get their first month for 99 cents. I actually met with the owner of the company, Play Submissions Helper, because they were in Rhode Island, where I lived at the time. And I gave some of my own advice or suggestions as a user of the site. And they rewarded me with this promo code, which I've had ever since. So, like I said, if anyone is trying to write plays, Play Submissions Helper has a podcast that plays the thing with Andrew Black. It's a great listen. Playwriting, I think now is the time to do writing, folks, because this thing won't last forever. Even if it's 5 years from now when we do live events again or whatever, this will eventually go away. It's a great time to kind of incubate and do your writing now. Well, Jamie, thanks again, man. Why don't you tell us what your music website is in case anyone wants to go visit your music website?
Okay, it's www.jamiecowperthwait, JamieCowperthwait.com. So.
And I'll link that in the description of the video too, so people can get it direct.
Right.
Well, Jamie, thanks, man. We'll talk again off the air. We'll probably have you on another podcast. And have a great weekend, my man.
Thanks. You too, Mike. Take care.
See everybody. Thank you.